frictional force is going to oppose the motion of this object. It's going to oppose the motion, meaning it's going to move to the left. This is going to be our frictional force. It's going to move to the left. Now, the thing is this. The frictional force, it opposes the movement. Either there is a movement to the right, it's going to move to the left. If there is a movement, let's say for example, there is a movement to the left. Let's say for example, we have the surface. Sorry about that. We have our surface. Now, the movement now is to the left. The object, the frictional force, it's going to oppose the movement. It's going to move to the right. One thing I also want to emphasize, guys, is this. Know whether there is a frictional force or there is no frictional force. How are you going to know? In a statement, the examiner might tell you that whether it is a rough or a smooth surface, whether there is a rock, there is this, there is that. But always know that when there is a rougher surface, there is a frictional force. When there is a smooth surface, there is no frictional force, guys. Whatever that you do, whether you're gonna be drawing a force diagram, calculating Newton's second law, but whatever you do, know that when the examiner says that it is a smooth surface, meaning the frictional force is not there. But if there is a rough surface, there is a frictional force. And another thing is this: the more rougher the surface it is, the more frictional force it is between the object and the surface. The lesser the lesser the surface it is rough, the lesser the frictional force it is. So those are the things that you need to know, meaning that there will be greater magnitude of our normal force acting on the object. Because remember, also, frictional force can be calculated by the coefficient, either the coefficient of kinetic or the coefficient of, but I'm just gonna call it the coefficient of friction, times the normal force. Meaning, the greater the frictional force, there's gonna be greater the what? The normal force. Meaning our coefficient is going to be lesser. Because these two, they are directly proportional. The frictional force is directly proportional to the normal force, and it's inversely proportional to the coefficient of friction. Always know that. Meaning, when the frictional force increases, the normal force will also increase. When the frictional force decreases, also the normal force decreases. Now, another thing is this that I want to emphasize. When they speak of the word rest, we're gonna be using the statistic frictional force, our SFS, statistic frictional force. We're gonna be using our statistic frictional force. Our statistic frictional force. When the word moving, we're gonna be using kinetic frictional force. Know the two different. Know the two different. Know the two different between the word rest, moving. When an object is at rest, meaning there is no movement, we're gonna be using the statistic frictional force. Mostly, they will give you a scenario on an incline. An object is at rest and an incline, and then they say to you, calculate this, calculate that, and that. Mostly, when it's at rest, we use our Fs. When it's moving, we use our Fk. We use Fk. We use Fk. Now, I want to explain the thing of the coefficient of frictional force. I want to explain this. The coefficient of frictional force. Now this one, it depends mostly on the type of material that is on the surface. Now we speak of let's speak, for example, let's speak of rubber rubber on a or on our tire surfaces, né? It's gonna be higher coefficient, meaning there will be a lot of grip, and then there will be less sliding. Now, people who want to be going around, sliding, going on an ice skating, those ones who are skating, they have, those skates are made of steel. Now the steel on a wet ice, it contains low kinetic of coefficient of frictional force, meaning it is going to be easy to slide. There will be less grip or no grip at all between the surface and that steel. Between the surface and that steel. Now another thing is know the coefficient of frictional force, how it works, where it works, but know it that also it can be written that it is the frictional force over the normal force. That's our coefficient of frictional force. It can be calculated through this formula, but mostly I think it is given on the formula sheet. And another thing I want to also emphasize is when you are on a surface, when I want to go back to the statistic frictional force. Now, when you are on a surface, I spoke that on a horizontal surface and there is no force applied, there will be no statistic frictional force. There will be no statistic frictional force on a horizontal surface. There will be no statistic frictional force if there is no force applied. When they tell you an object is at rest, and then they don't tell you either it's a rough surface or what, but if they tell you an object is at rest on a horizontal surface, know that there is no, and also there is no force applied. Know that there is no statistic frictional force. But when a small force is applied to an object of rest, then the statistic frictional force will be there. The statistic frictional force will be there. Know these things, guys. Know these things. And also, one thing is this. As the force increases, the statistic frictional force, it will also continue to increase until it reaches a maximum where it can no longer increase. That maximum, we call it the statistic maximum. We call it the statistic frictional force at maximum. That's why now it cannot increase, it cannot either decrease. We speak now, we enter into the kinetic frictional force. We enter on a kinetic frictional force. And also, the kinetic frictional force, it remains constant while the object moves at a constant speed. If the object is moving at a constant velocity, constant speed, actual velocity, it is going to remain constant in the kinetic frictional force. It is going to remain constant, and that kinetic frictional force, it will become smaller than the maximum statistic frictional force. It is going to be our Fs is going to be greater than the US Fn, and our Fk is going to be equal to coefficient of Fk times the normal force. Sorry about that, looks like a P, sorry. It's going to be equal to the coefficient of kinetic times the normal force. It's going to be equal to the coefficient of statistic times the normal force. That's how you calculate it. That's how you calculate it. That's how you calculate it. Know your formulas. Know how your formulas works, how they are going to be applied, where to apply them, and how to apply them. Also, be very careful and be very vigilant, especially when it comes to these two, the statistic one and the kinetic one. Know that these two, I know they are like, they are they are kind of like they are kind of like confusing, especially when we come to the one on the horizontal and the one on the incline. But guys, these things, they are easy to know. Just know them, learn them, understand them, understand these two. I also want to move to the applied force. Then yeah, want us to move to the applied force and the tension. Now, in the applied force, it is the force that a person exerts on another object, or an object exerts on another object. For an example, we have a person, ne, pushes the, let's say we have a person who pushes the object. They are pushing the object, they are pushing it to the right. Now this person is pushing the object to the right. Now our applied force is going to be to the right, our normal force is going to be upward. Then we are going to have our gravitational force, and then we are going to have our frictional force. Now, for example, if a person he applies a force to the right, now that object is going to move to the right. It's going to move to the right because that person, he applies it to the right. Most of the time, people, they will be saying, they see a person is in this place, so they are assuming that when they are drawing, they are supposed to move this way. It does not work like that. You need to move to the right, to the direction of that place, even if like that person, let's say for an example, that person was on this side, was moving this side, he was pushing our object to this side. Now that person, this is going to be our normal force. We are going to have our weight or our gravitational force. Our force applied is going to be to the right, because the motion to the left, because the motion is in the left. It's going to be our frictional force. Now in terms of my direction, this one's going to be negative. Our motion is on the left. It does not matter whether the person is they say this side or this side, but the thing is, where is it moving? Where the object is moving, that's where our force it is acting. That's where our force it is acting. Now I want to speak about a tension, assuming that we have an object, a hanging object. Let me start smaller. We have a hanging object. Now here, an object of mass. Now here, our object is hanging in a string. Now when we are going to move in drawing of free body diagrams, I'm gonna explain a lot of more about this one in free body diagrams, because you guys, you're gonna be needing it. Now our weight is going to act downwards, our tension is going to act upwards. Now remember when we were speaking upwards, downwards, but one thing I want to emphasize is this one. When an object is hanging, there is no normal force on that object, because that object is not in contact with the surface. People have this tendency, when they see that an object is hanging, they put on the normal force. There is no normal force in that object. There is no normal force. That's what I wanted to emphasize. There is no normal force. Now, the thing is this, guys, when an object is hanging either on a tension, we are speaking of a string or a cable. That's when an object is hanging. They will be saying that it's on a string, on a that, on a cable. But the important words, the important things are the two words, a string and a cable. Now, they will be saying that the thing is hanging on a ceiling, it's hanging on a, but the thing is a tension. It's a tension. Now, a tension, it's a rope, it's a what, but the tension, it complies actually to Newton's third law. We're gonna be moving to, I think I'll be explaining it later stage. Newton's third law. It's another law, application law. Now, in Newton's third law, we call it the reaction law, reaction to action law. Now, the thing is, a tension, it acts upwards. There is a force also of gravity acting downwards because this object contains mass. Now, these two, they are in opposition to each other. They are in opposition to each other. They are in opposition to each other. One thing that will determine the one that where an object is going to move, whether it's going to be the tension. If the tension is greater, meaning the object is going to be moving upwards. But if the tension is lesser, meaning our mass is greater, that it's going to move downwards. It's going to move downwards. It's going to move where? Downwards. Now I want us to move on one important part, then we end this video. It's about the drawing of force and the free body diagram. Now, guys, I think you saw on the past videos I've been drawing things. Some people, they've been asking, what is it that you are drawing? But the thing is, this one, the first diagram. Let's start with the first diagram. Now, the first diagram, it is the force that is represented as a block and the forces as vectors. Remember when we went back there. Now I'm going to show you the differences between the first diagram and the free body diagram. And I'm going also to apply them where on an incline, on the